I'm Amanda Tarullo. I'm an associate professor of psychological and brain sciences, and in my lab we study the effects of adversity and poverty on brain development and on cognitive development. I'm going to tell you today about a project that we're currently doing in South Africa. So it's well established that children who experience adversity early in life tend to have poorer cognitive outcomes. And in my lab, a lot of what we look at is how patterns of EEG, patterns of neural activity, may mediate links between early adversity and cognitive outcomes. Globally, there are over 200 million young children in low and middle income countries who have unrealized cognitive potential. And what I mean by that is that the level of cognitive function that they genetically had the potential to have is not reached because they didn't have the environmental supports for their brain to develop optimally. So due to malnutrition, due to poor prenatal care, due to living in adverse circumstances, a whole cluster of risk factors. So obviously this population is the population in which we most would want to be studying how early adversity impacts brain development and cognitive outcomes. However, there's a severe lack of developmental research in low-income countries. So 90% of the world's children live in low or middle-income countries, and that accounts for about 4% of research on child development. So it's extremely underrepresented, and if you start looking at neuroscience, it's even more underrepresented. Measures of the brain, there's very little. But there are two important questions that, at least two important questions that we want to ask. One is, are our brain behavior findings universal or context-specific? So most of what we think we know about links between patterns of brain activity and children's behavioral or cognitive outcomes is, again, based on these privileged kids. And even when people study the effects of adversity on the brain, most of the time we're studying low-income children who live in high-income countries, right? A child living below the poverty line in Boston is not the same as a child living in poverty in a low-income country. There are infrastructure differences, there are differences in clusters of risk, so we can't just generalize. So it's important to do research in this broader range of settings to understand the pathways that impact brain and cognitive development for this population that's most at risk. It's also relevant from an intervention perspective because most interventions in these settings, the outcomes that are measured are behavioral or from questionnaires. And so understanding impact on brain measures is something that doesn't have to be culturally validated in each new setting and that could tell us something broader about which interventions may be having the most impact. So I want to tell you today about a project that I'm part of. This is the Zanin birth cohort, and if you can see on the map, it's in South Africa, and the red dot is the location where we are testing. So it's a rural area in northeastern South Africa, Limpopo province, which is mostly a farming area, and so most of the parents work on the avocado farms or other farms. This is part of a randomized controlled trial led by Peter Rockers, who's my colleague here at BU in Global Health. And so what we've been doing is we've been doing measures of EEG and eye tracking at 7 months, 16 months, and we just started data collection at 26 months. It has been an education for me in why so little of this research has been done, and also a lesson in patience for type A personalities about what you cannot control. So there are many factors that we've learned a lot from, such as how do you collect EEG when the electricity is shut off for 3 to 6 hours a day, right? That was what I spent last week figuring out. And you know, if a child has never been in a car seat before and they've just ridden over bumpy roads in a car seat for an hour to get to your lab, how do you calm them down enough to collect EEG, right? So we've learned a lot through this process, but we've had an incredible team of local staff, and we've been able to be very effective in collecting EEG. Eventually, we'll be looking at the impact of the intervention on neurocognitive outcomes, but at this point, I can share with you some data from the first wave that just shows that prenatal risk factors predict poorer outcomes in much the way, poorer brain maturity outcomes in much the way that we might expect in a US sample. Thank you.